rise of the COP26 summit in UK's Glasgow, where top world leaders will be discussing climate emergency. Prime Minister Modi will be speaking in just a bit from now. On agenda are contentious issues like carbon emission, global temperature, financing the fight against climate change, and fixing responsibility. This time around, there are high expectations from India as well, which has exceeded the targets set by the world in mitigating climate change. Remember, COP26, which stands for the 26th meeting of the Conference of Parties, hence COP, is a group of 197 member nations of the United Nations Framework Convention. Let's also say good evening to Mr. Leo Saldana, Coordinator of Environment Support Group, and Dr. Fayaz Kudsar, Scientist in charge of the Yamuna Biodiversity Park at CMDE, University of Delhi. Let me actually first go across to Dr. Fayaz. Dr. Fayaz, much debate is again going on, as is every time around such a big event, of how much we are doing and what we need to do. And often the argument that comes in is the developed countries versus developing countries, and how so much more pressure seems to be on developing countries, to up their targets and meet the targets for climate change. Where do you stand on this debate? Is that how we should be viewing our war against climate change?
Actually, fundamentally, when you see that we have reduced drastically our relationship with our own, planet, and therefore the way we have started, handling our planet, that has created so much of problem over a period of time. But it is very clear that a rich country done emission historically. Now they are saying developing country to reduce emission, and looking at the limitations with the developing country. Even though we are willing to reduce emission, there is a cost involved in it, and that cost needs to be set right by the developed country. And therefore, the most important part of this negotiation would be looking at the looking at an issue that how we get more financial support and technology support, because clean energy is the need of the hour, and that is most important, and for which we had requirement of a lot of money. Because recently you have seen we had a huge problem when we had a scarcity of coal for a few days, and a country like India, which requires a lot of energy and largely dependent on coal, how you leave coal and reduce emission? So in this way, a rich country who has already developed and did maximum emission over a period of time should help developed country to look at it. And other important part of it is, when you look at India, India has huge protected area, means green cover. And so we need to protect those green cover that will help in neutralizing carbon. And for example, in Delhi, you see Government of India, DTA, has developed network of biodiversity park. So most of the urban city needs to develop this model of biodiversity park so that we can achieve large amount of carbon neutrality, especially in urban center, who are the major emitters. In fact, even in the country like India, we look at it.
Yes, and I will come to that aspect in just a bit. But if you can also, since we are talking about carbon neutrality and net zero emissions, which has become a big phrase, being currently debated again, because some of the countries have set in their net zero targets. India seems to be extremely firm on the fact that we're not going to do so right now. So can you explain it to our viewers, Dr. Fayaz, of what does this exactly mean?
It means simply that emission need to be reduced. And when you look at the present rate of emission, when you compare with any developed country, we are much lower still. But in my opinion, India is a country which has ample of opportunity if they go for restoration of degraded ecosystem. That restoration itself help India to reduce carbon, because when you look at the carbon emission, you have a lot of carbon emission, and appropriately, if you have a green cover, then probably achieving neutrality would be much more easier. So therefore, we must look forward for restoring our degraded ecosystem. That is one of the major theme of COP26.
So, okay, Now, let me bring in Mr. Leo Saldana as well on this. And the point that was earlier being made about our green cover and what we need to do to protect it, to bring down our own emissions for the people who live in this country, Mr. Saldana. In that sense, do you believe that India, for our own good and not because of what other nations, the West, the East are doing, for our own good, set such a net zero kind of a target, which is sooner than later?
I think one of the main principles under which the Rio Declaration was formed, and we all agreed to it and we ratified it, and subsequently the IPCC was formed as a Convention on Biological Diversity and so many other conventions relating to the state of the planet. It's on the idea that there is a common but differentiated responsibility. That is because United States of America, historically, say from the 1700s till now, has contributed to 25% of the carbon which is creating problems today. Even now, if China may have overtaken just now the United States, but US continues to be number 2. And if you take the European bloc, they have substantially contributed, and if not 25%, they're about 20%. So if you take Russia, Japan, European Union, and North America, they would have contributed about 60 to 65% of the historical emissions. Now, just because we have started experiencing extreme weather events in the last 3-4 years across the world, be it forest fires, be it floods, be it cyclones, typhoons. This was not something that we did not anticipate. This was predicted from 1960s. Global warming as a science has evolved from the 1980s substantially. Scientists have warned us about a decade ago about this scenario, and they in fact underestimated the severity of climate change events. In fact, they are out by at least 5 years. So we should take all this into consideration when we decide what should India do. So yes, India should obviously not produce unnecessary carbon. I have no problem keeping coal in the ground, consuming less, making sure there is equitable development, that everyone has enough to live comfortably in terms of shelter, in terms of clothing, education, food. There is a sense of equality, which is true across all of India. But we should hold it as something we make as a sovereign choice. It cannot be pushed down on us. We have gone through 250 years of colonization. The West has not been responsible. The $100 billion commitment they made in Paris climate, Boris Johnson has not made them a commitment. Trump, for instance, walked out of this 3 years ago. And what Joe Biden has done now is basically return back to 3 years ago where United States was. Rejoin the climate talks, stop some of their big dirty investments. That's all he has done. He has not yet committed to anything new. So I think this is an opportunity. The next, Mr. Narendra Modi should not go and grandstand and say, we will do what you want us to do because he wants to win some personal friends. He has to represent the country. That is his job. That's why he's the Prime Minister. He cannot go there and say one thing and do a different thing here because he's doing exactly opposite of what he's saying there. Here he has watered down all the first major decision the Prime Minister did in his first term was to dilute our environmental laws through the TSR Subramanian Committee. Now, today is the deadline to comprehensively destroy the Forest Conservation Act, which in turn will destroy the Forest Rights Act. We have never had a Prime Minister who was so disastrous for the environment ever in the history of free India. I would even say Prime Minister Modi is far more destructive than the British were during the colonial regime, because at least then we had carbon capital, we had biodiversity, we had a large landmass which was still green. Today, what we are producing is fudged reports. The Forest Survey of India is producing reports by showing any tree cover as forests. It's well established, and recent studies have proven that even those forests which are so-called national parks globally are net carbon emitters. And there is a very complex reason for that. When the earth warms up and when the soil warms up, the metabolic rates of soil microflora increases immensely and they end up producing more carbon, even with forest cover. So we are in a bad state. So we must force the West and North America to cut back. They cannot continue to have that kind of 20 times is the, if not 20 times, at least 17 times is the amount of carbon that an average American consumes. But that doesn't really say anything. Half of America doesn't consume that much. Most of that consumption is by the super rich of America. And the story is no different in India. The super rich of India, top 1% of India, have major contributions to make to carbon emissions. Look at how Adani and Ambani have got all sorts of licenses. They may be good friends with the Prime Minister, but that does not give them the chance to go and open up coal mines in the thickest of the forests, destroying Adivasi lands, destroying indigenous rights in the Northeast. And what did the Prime Minister do 2 months ago? He opened up the Andaman and Nicobar Islands and the Northeast of India. Some of the best forests in the world are there. To palm oil cultivation. Yes, we need palm oil, but you know where most of our palm oil goes? To making ice cream, to making condiments.
Yeah.
We need to have that as food.
No,
when
so
millets are not being grown, millets is the way to cut down on carbon, not going for palm oil cultivation. Maybe his rich friends want that money, but India doesn't want it. Indians don't want it. I think we need to really have a very hard talk with our Prime Minister first before he goes.
So
He's not even accountable. He has never met the press at all. You people should hold him accountable because it's our lives at risk now.
Mr. Saldana, 2 points. Yes, 2 very important points that you've raised. One, on the accountability and the responsibility that even some of the developed nations have to take, or we have to, at such international platforms, make them take that responsibility. The second aspect that you've raised is what is it that the government is doing here back at home versus the stand that we're taking in terms of leading climate change internationally. So let me take it across to Dr. Fayaz and ask him that question, because the point is that you say the developed nations, the Western world needs to also help the poorer ones. But the ones who are not doing their own job, the ones who are not meeting their own targets and holding up their end of the bargain, how can we expect them to also finance it for the rest of the world?
You see, I agree with other panelists. Wonderfully, he put up everything, that it is not that we should bow down before the international forum, but we must be strongly put forward ourselves that what we want and what we don't want. But in the same time, at our own country, we need to see that how we protect our precious forest and river. So therefore, we have to work in both the hand. We have to struggle hard. We have to negotiate hard to see that how international communities support us when we look at the green energy especially. And in the same time, in our own country, our protected areas must not be given for coal mining, what Sir has suggested. So therefore, it is very interesting to see that even though our country is, have ample of opportunity to curtail and reach to zero emission by protecting its own forest and restoring its own degraded landscapes. In the same time, you need to negotiate very strongly, as our panelists suggested, that we must not say yes to everything. And because our Prime Minister has gone representing our country and show that what we want, what we don't want. And it is our own decision that how much we can cut and when we will cut. If we bow down before international agency, probably not only our development, but environment will be, jeopardized.
Okay, so Dr. Fayaz and Mr. Leo Saldana, thank you so much for joining us.
Can I say one thing which is important, because this is called COP26, is marked by vaccine apartheid. Let's understand the West, much as they talk, blocked most of the developing nations from reaching there, first by denying them vaccines, and then making sure that if only they took those vaccines which benefit the transnational corporations, which are located in the northern bloc, then only they will be allowed to come inside. Now, if the West was serious about climate change, they would have made sure the entire world is protected. They have treated us like not second class, but third class citizens of the world. And now they want us to take the responsibility for their damage. I think we must have some really, really hard negotiations there. I hope the Ministry of Environment and Forests, which is very poorly represented, I've been to COPs before, and I find that China goes with 150, 200 people. India goes with 10 or 15. It is terrible statement that we do not take that response. We are 1.3 billion. Between China and India, we are like almost half of the world's population.
Right.
We have a major role to play in shaping the future of this world. and making sure it
Yes.
goes back to sanity.
Yes, whether
But
I
our
believe
Prime
also,
Minister
Mr.
must play
Saldana, that a
same
lot of
role.
that change will also start from home. And if we genuinely want to be the leaders and warriors of climate change, then we need to start that at home by setting higher standards for ourselves and then forcing the rest of the world to do so. Of course, there are nuances involved. There is the economics involved of it, and how much can a country like ours do versus the others who are in a better place today financially and economically speaking to take larger strides and bigger steps, but don't do so. But while we pressurize them to join this fight and genuinely bring about changes, I think we need to lead by example and do a lot more with the policies back home as well. We are watching out for Prime Minister's speech. I'm told maybe in about 30 minutes from now he will speak. Post that, perhaps we can get reactions from our experts. So thank you so much to Leo Saldana and Dr. Fayaz for speaking to me right now.